In the year that King Uzziah died, this is how Isaiah chapter 6 begins. And that's the chapter where we read about Isaiah's vision of God sitting on his throne over all of creation in his majesty and splendor and awe, as the fiery angels, the seraphim, are surrounding him and bowing at his feet and crying out, "Holy, holy, holy," in worship. Tremendous chapter. But this is a good example of where asking the right kinds of questions about strange things that we may encounter in the text that are unfamiliar to us becomes very helpful. Why does that chapter begin in the year King Uzziah died? I'd always wondered that, growing up reading this passage. What year did he die? Why was his death significant somehow in all of this? More importantly, why did the writer, in this case Isaiah, choose to include that fact as the introduction to this part of his narrative? Well, when you go back and you dig into the history, what you discover is King Uzziah, who was king over the southern nation of Judah during the time of the divided kingdom in the Old Testament. King Uzziah was the second longest reigning monarch in Judah's history. 52 years he reigned. And during Uzziah's reign, the nation of Judah experienced its greatest period of prosperity ever. Under his leadership, Judah was among the more significant, prosperous, and powerful nations in that part of the world. Little tiny kingdom here in the southern part of the Palestine Canaan region. And the reign of Uzziah's kingship is marked by great economic prosperity and economic expansion, great military might and control and power, as well as geopolitical growth and expansion. Uzziah was able to expand the borders of Judah, gain access to sea coasts, both in the south on the Red Sea, which was very significant for both ocean-going and overland trading routes, was able to defeat the Philistines and expand the territory further to the Mediterranean coast and establish trading ports there. Their expansion allowed Judah to control the trade highways that ran through the region, two different major trade routes that ran through the region. And with control of those routes, basically able to tax the great caravans that would move through the region. And so they got a cut of every load of commercial cargo that was making its way throughout the region. And just because of the geography, most of those trade routes had to run right through the kingdom. And so it was a terrific time of peace, great stability in the country. What's very interesting about Uzziah's reign and what's going on in the history of the world is its connection to Jonah, the prophet Jonah. And you know the story of Jonah and his being called to go to Nineveh, and the whole story of being swallowed by the whale, and he eventually obeys and makes his way to the city of Nineveh. Well, here's where the threads of history all weave together. Because Nineveh is the capital of Assyria, one of the great empires of the world at this point in history. And the ministry of Jonah occurred very close to the beginning of the time when Uzziah would come to the throne. He assumed kingship at the age of 16. His father had been king before him. And so in those early years, as Uzziah is a teenage king, he doesn't have a lot of control yet. But this is when Jonah's ministry is taking place. And Jonah's ministry, Jonah's preaching in the capital of the Assyrian Empire, resulted in a period of peace and tranquility in Assyria. For a period of time, the Assyrian people there in Nineveh turned their attention to this Hebrew God Yahweh that they had heard from now, this Jewish prophet had come. And so what it produces in Assyria is a diminishing of their military aims in the rest of the world. So Assyria kind of goes quiet for a generation or two. And that's exactly when Uzziah comes to power as a young 20-something-year-old king, and is able to then lead Judah on this long period of growth, expansion, prosperity. The economy just explodes, does well. Their military grows. In fact, Uzziah's fame becomes international. That we find mentions of him in the historical records of other nations, like Egypt. And so, for the better part of 40 years, Judah is really good. People are wealthy. Real estate market is going gangbusters. The trade is going well. The stock market is shooting through the roof. Not that they had a stock market, but those kinds of things. And then sometime around the year 750, a couple of things happen. A great earthquake hits in that part of the world in Canaan. Really rattles both geographically and socially, rattles society. Causes a lot of fear and panic among its destruction. And then Uzziah is struck with leprosy, and he contracts this fatal disease. He has to kind of go into self-isolation. Does that word sound familiar? Self-quarantine. And so he's getting older. Things have been going really well for a long period of time. And now society and the nation is beginning to be a little bit shaken. Their great, powerful king has now contracted this terrible disease. We've had this earthquake that has kind of broken the spell of how strong and powerful and well off we are as a nation in Judah. And one other piece comes into play. The Assyrians begin to wake back up. They've had a series of changes in their own leadership. And in 745 BC, an Assyrian chieftain will come to power. Tiglath-Pileser is mentioned in the Bible, all through the Bible, one of the more significant Assyrian leaders in the Old Testament. Tiglath-Pileser comes to power here very close to the end of Uzziah's life. So Uzziah's power is quickly waning. He's in quarantine because of leprosy. His son is having to kind of act as a steward in the day-to-day leadership of the country. People are beginning to get quite nervous. The prosperity and the stability and the security that the nation had known for 4 decades is beginning to crumble. And Tiglath-Pileser and the Assyrians, they set their sights on control of Israel and Judah, again, because of the great economic wealth that it represents down there. And so they begin their incursions back down into Israel. Of course, that strikes great fear into the people too. In their lifetime, they had never dealt with that kind of outside threat of a foreign power. And yet here come the Assyrians. We're beginning to get reading about it on the internet. We're seeing the stuff on CNN and Fox News. The Assyrians are threatening. The Assyrians are making plans. And indeed, it wouldn't be too many years later. It wouldn't be Tiglath-Pileser. It would be a subsequent leader. But it wouldn't be too many years later when Assyria would indeed invade and defeat the northern kingdom of Israel and capture the capital city of Samaria. Stories that then you can read about when you get into chapter 30 and 30 through 34, 35 in Isaiah, and King Hezekiah. All of that happens sometime later. But it's all beginning here toward the end of the reign of King Uzziah. And then finally, 742, Uzziah dies. And this is a cause of great anxiety and great fear in the nation. Their king has been slowly fading away. Now he's dead. What happens next? In the few years before, political turmoil and infighting within the leadership had come along as powerful political figures were battling for who would have control upon Uzziah's death, who was gonna have the influence over his son. And now Uzziah's died. He's dead. The Assyrians are cranking back up. They're making noise. They're threatening to come. 40 plus years of economic prosperity and well-being and relative security and peace and economic growth and political or international esteem and fame, they're all at stake. They're all at risk. What happens next? And so it's a time of incredible crisis and fear in the country. And that's all recorded and talked about in Isaiah chapter 1 to 5. But what's instructive for us in the middle of all of that is God's voice of both the judgment and compassion in all of that. That there were some issues facing the nation of Judah. And one of the questions running through the first 5 chapters, and it's important for us even today, for every generation always, who do you put your trust in? Who do you put your trust in? And this is fundamentally a worldview question. This is how it relates to our class. Okay? Every worldview offers something in answer to this question. What do we look to for meaning, for purpose, for security, for stability, to answer those most important questions in life? Okay. When things are going well, we often will answer that question one way. So here's what I want you to think about and do some discussion here in classroom about. What are the things that you observe for yourself and for others that we often really do put our trust in, that we really do count on to give our life meaning and security? And what happens when those are taken away or are threatened to be taken away? How do people react? And where do we turn? Right? So every worldview has something to say here. What gives our life meaning? What gives our life purpose? Who takes care of us? What is a source of peace in our life? And there may be some parallels for today as we continue to navigate this global pandemic. Right? It's a time of great fear and anxiety for many, maybe for you. Right? And it may be some of the things that we have looked to give our life daily meaning, whether it be the start of baseball season or the basketball playoffs or March Madness or getting out and going to parties with our friends or going to work, having a job. What happens when those things are threatened? To whom do we look? What do we do? In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and lifted up. God is still on his throne, and he is still the sovereign Lord over all of the earth. He is still in control. And, there's great debate as to whether God is bringing all of this stuff on a nation as a form of judgment. Maybe. That certainly is the case for the events in Isaiah 1 to 5. We have to be careful not just outright applying all of that to us. That message was to the people of Judah. Whether that's the case or not, Isaiah 6 is still true and does apply to us. God is on his throne. He's high and lifted up. And what he does want for us is to look to him as our source of trust and look to him as our source of meaning and significance and peace. So whom do we trust? To whom do we look?